7 people found their bodies frozen for thousands of years. When most human beings die, they usually bury or burn on the habits of some religions around the world, while in our strange world, which always surprises us with more wonders, the person can be saved after his death for 10 years or perhaps for thousands of years. Strangely enough, they look exactly the same shape and body who died on it as if he had died yesterday. So let us take a look at 7 people whose bodies were frozen as they were after death. 1. John Torrington. A British officer involved in a mission to explore the North Pole in 1846 and unfortunately died of severe pneumonia at the age of 22 years. No one knows what happened to the crew until some of their tombs were discovered on a remote island in Canada. In 1980, experts dug more than 5 feet below the surface of the ice until they reached the frozen coffin and opened it to find John's body staring into the casket. Preserved his body incredibly so that her eyes were open and still shiny blue, while the skin was intact and the internal organs still intact. The climate of the frozen Arctic pole helped to save the body as much. A huge file was kept inside of years. Scientists took some samples to study them from the body of John frozen and then buried the body again in the place where they found it. 2. Vladimir Lenin. The founder of the first communist state died in 1923, Vladimir Lenin, before his 54th birthday. 4 days after his death, the Supreme Soviet authorities decided to erect a tomb at the Kremlin Wall in the Red Square, where Lenin's body was mummified in a mausoleum. Lenin's body was the first to be embalmed, and the usual solution of formalin, zinc chloride, alcohol, glycerin and water was introduced. Internal organs such as the brain and heart were removed. This process allowed the body to be preserved only from rapid decay. In order for the mummy to remain in the normal state of care, it has to take care of it 2 or 3 times a week, rubbing the hands and feet of Lenin with a special solution. The body was placed in a bath filled with a nutritious solution, and the distortions in those places, which were usually covered by the dress until the early 1940s. The mummification of Lenin's body in 1924 was the finest. The body is still today, 100 years after Lenin's death, and the mummies are likely to survive for centuries. 3. The Snowman. This man died 5,200 years ago, but his body was found in very good condition in 1991 by some tourists who thought he had recently died in the Alps. Because his skin was still intact, despite the passage of thousands of years after his death, researchers and specialists examined the body carefully until they found traces of the last meal taken in the stomach, which consisted of deer meat and bread, where the body was kept in the snow throughout this period. 4. Ramses II. One of the most famous pharaohs of ancient Egypt, the rule of ancient Egypt 3,200 years ago, was discovered in 1881, and its mummies were stylized and staggeringly preserved until the hair was still on the back of his head. But in 1971 scientists noticed that the body began to suffer rapidly despite the techniques of mummification in the past, so he was transferred to Paris to treat the body with the latest French roads. While the French law recognizes that anyone on the ground to France alive or dead must have a passport, it was necessary to extract an Egyptian passport to Ramses II after his death by 3,200 years in an accident. 5. The Man of the Swamp. It was found in one of the swamps of Denmark in 1950, by some local people who thought it was the victim of a modern murder, but later found to be much older. The specialists attributed his death to 2,200 years ago as revealed by the rope around his neck and the existing effects. The body was dead, it may have been donated as a human sacrifice, and the body was immeasurably preserved. His face seemed frozen in an exciting way, as if he were asleep and not dead, and when examined through X-rays, his internal organs proved to be excellent. A swamp without oxygen and in cold weather. 6. George Mallory. An English mountain climber, tried to climb Mount Everest in 1923 but unfortunately was never seen again until his body was found by a mission sent to cover his disappearance in 1999. He was well kept even 77 years after his death. His body was bent on his face to the ground, and because of the nature of the atmosphere there was preserved body carefully until his body was intact and conservative, and there is no damage to the face after all these years. Even the expression's frozen face was very clear. 7. Eva Braun. She was the first lady in Argentina to die of cancer in 1952, and there was national mourning at the time of her death. Her husband arranged to mummify his body through a doctor named Pedro Ara, who worked in what was known to some as the art of death. 3 years later, a military dictatorship took over, until Eva Byron or her husband was recalled. It was later revealed that her body had been transferred to Italy and then to Spain. He was then sent back to Argentina again, after the passage of 18 years since her death, when he was finally buried.